So, today I'm going to be discussing a topic that's pretty much talked about in radio, television, searched online numerous times in how to do it. It's basically looking at fat loss through the lens of nutrition and exercise. Now, this is as you probably, most of you will know, that this is a very broad topic as well. I can't really get into the extensive research, but I'm going to give you a practical overview of what it's all about, trying to distill it down to an area where it's understandable, it's not confusing, because there is a lot of confusion out there regarding this particular topic. Specifically when you combine the nutritional component as well as the exercise component. And a lot of times, to the best of their ability, the political leaders, both at the municipal and provincial, even federal level, have tried to tackle this issue because it is getting a little bit worse, or actually much worse, in the younger populations regarding obesity. So we're going to look at a few points regarding what the research looks at in terms of diet as well as exercise, and how that combines to give someone the edge to try and stay lean for a long period of time without feeling tired, and so on and so forth. I'll try not to go too quick, but I've got limited time, and I know you guys have questions. Whatever, if an idea comes into your head, don't worry, just put up your hand, I'll point to you, and you shoot your question at me, no problem, okay? I won't let you wait to the end, because then, who knows, you may not have time. So, without further ado, we're going to look at this particular topic. Now, based on the American College of Sports Medicine's position paper, the following statements and recommendations for weight loss programs are as follows. First, prolonged fasting and diet programs that severely restrict caloric intake are scientifically undesirable and can be medically dangerous. So, first and foremost, a lot of the clinics that are out there, and they can, I'm not going to name them, you've heard them on the radio and television ads, promote a specific way of consuming foods. A lot of them are masking the fact that, in essence, you're consuming under 1,000 calories or just over 1,000 calories daily. And that essentially is going to set up for what I call metabolic failure within 2 days after this event is taking place, because a lot of individuals are coming from an area of caloric excess, upwards of 2,000 to 3,000 times more than what they're going to be ingesting when they go to these particular clinics. That is the basis of how they're actually going to reduce the size of the individual. Yeah, there's monitoring that goes on, but that is pretty much unsustainable at that point. And that's what the ACSM, this particular group, is looking at in terms of point number one. Second, fasting and diet programs that severely restrict caloric intake result in the loss of large amounts of water, electrolytes, minerals, glycogen stores, which is basically your storage form of energy, okay, within the muscle, within the nervous system, and other fat-free tissue, including proteins with fat-free tissues with minimal amounts of fat loss. So what we're looking at here is now we're not only losing, well, what are we losing? I make fun of this all the time, and I this is one part I say in the class all the time when I'm teaching sport nutrition, because it almost goes pretty much hand in hand, is that, if the person comes in with a body shape looking like a pear, they're going to come out of these clinics looking like a smaller pear. Nothing really has changed, okay? Body composition has changed in the fact that they've lost muscle, they've lost water, but they really haven't changed their real body composition through exercise in that fashion. And in some instances, some of these diets are so restrictive that for a brief period of time, they can't exercise because of the lowered caloric intake that they are consuming. So that is counterintuitive to what is supposed to be done, at least in 50% of the time. Third, mild caloric restriction, 500 to 1,000 calories less than the usual daily intake, results in a smaller loss of water, electrolytes, minerals, and other fat-free tissue, and is less likely to cause malnutrition. This point pretty much states that in order to change something in the body, in this case, trying to reduce body fat, you have to try not to make the body notice what you're doing. You have to trick it, because it actually resets pretty well. We wouldn't have survived this long on this earth if we didn't adapt that well, okay? So this isn't like no other. Your body's main function doesn't care what you're doing. Whether you're going to work, exercising, driving your car, it's trying to keep you alive as long as possible. That's its only job, its only duty. So if you keep that in your head, you can understand why some of these caloric restrictive diets or manipulation of certain macronutrients are counterproductive to what the body's trying to help you do. And in this case, by slowly restricting caloric intake and not by a lot, the body doesn't recognize it until later on. Eventually, you're going to get an equilibrium, but during the time frame, there's a good chance that the body's going to retain as much muscle as possible because there isn't a really low caloric deficit. And at the same time, by manipulating the way you're consuming foods in terms of the frequency of eating, your metabolic rate and your resting metabolic rate will tend to go up. Okay, so it's a nice balance of slowly restricting caloric intake while manipulating macronutrient ratios, and I'll get to that a little bit later, but that is essentially all there is to it. It's not necessarily a magic bullet. There's more to it, most definitely, but like I said, I'm giving you the Coles Notes version today of what's going on. Fourth, dynamic exercise of large muscles helps to maintain fat-free tissue, including muscle mass and bone density, and results in losses of body weight. Weight loss resulting from an increase in energy expenditure is primarily in the form of fat weight. So, when you're exercising, I don't care what kind of exercise you're doing. If you're working with weights, kettlebells, doesn't matter. Machines, if you're on the treadmill, the stepper. The point is that we were made with muscles, and muscles are made to move. And when you get that happening, when you start moving, essentially the body has no choice. Remember, it's trying to keep you alive as long as possible. So can you imagine if you're exercising at a higher rate over a long period of time? You're getting used to the exercise and you're increasing your physical fitness. If the body's trying to keep you alive as long as possible, it's starting to break down certain fuels to continue that exercise. Okay, that's why a lot of, public or politicians or even gurus on TV and radio are always emphasizing exercise, which is great, but it's much more complex to just emphasize nutrition, which is the other half of the story. And in my opinion, I think it's the major part of the actual story regarding this particular issue. Okay, so working large muscle groups is going to help to increase what's called your resting metabolic rate. As you're sitting down right now, that's what it is, right? You're burning a specific amount of calories from doing absolutely nothing, okay? If you've got more muscle on your frame, the simple answer is that you are burning more per minute, per hour than someone that has got less muscle, okay? And that, unfortunately, why a lot of people, when they get older, are starting to pack on a few more. Because there's less muscle on the frame if they haven't kept up with exercise throughout their lifespan, okay? So there's another issue there. So it's starting to snowball. You're starting to understand exactly what's going on here. A nutritionally sound diet resulting in mild caloric restriction coupled with an endurance exercise program along with behavioral modification of existing eating habits is recommended for weight reduction. The rate of sustained weight loss should not exceed 1 kilogram or 2 pounds per week. Now, that's not set in stone necessarily, because we're not all built the same way, you see. We all have different body shapes, different ages, different lifestyles, okay? In saying that, certain individuals require different types of foods to be consumed, okay? Certain timing modifications regarding food intake as well. Yes, you've got what I mentioned here, behavioral modification. You know, we are creatures of habit. And the older you are, the harder it is sometimes to break certain habits, especially dietary and or the lack of activity, okay? So that is not gonna happen overnight. That will happen with continued steps, small goals leading to consistency. And that's the main word here. None of this is possible. You can't change a single thing without being as consistent as possible. Inconsistency ruins everything. Doesn't matter what you're doing, right? And this is really, really true when it comes to diet as well as exercise, okay? Or different food intake as well as exercise. I keep saying diet because, I don't know, it's a universal word everybody understands, but essentially that is it. You've got to keep doing the same thing over and over again in order to affect change. Unless you keep doing the same thing over and over again and you're not getting anything or anywhere, that's the only time that your body has to adapt to something new. So basically, 2 pounds per week ideally is what's recommended, but it does fluctuate between 1.5 pounds to 2.5 pounds within that range. But once again, very difficult to do so over a longer period of time. The body will tend to counteract that and get into a happy medium eventually. And what you would have to do then, if you really wanted to get advanced, is either increase your caloric expenditure or through exercise, or decrease your caloric intake through dietary means. I would rather choose the first one, okay? And especially as we get older, here's another kicker that I don't have in these notes here. After the age of 30, your metabolic rate drops about 2% each decade after that age. So if you don't change what you're consuming at a specific moment, and you continue to, even if you're eating clean, okay, within a certain amount of years, you can easily gain upwards of 50 pounds over a decade, 2 decades, okay? It really depends upon, you know, what actual modifications you have made to your lifestyle. And that really plays into exercise as well. I mean, when I'm 80 years old, I don't want to be eating, you know, a couple of carrots and a pea and that's my dinner. Because caloric intake has to be so low because my metabolic rate is just in the basement because I'm 80 years old, right? What I want to do is to ensure that I'm actually active throughout my life so I can enjoy a little bit more food, right? And the body is primed to burn both during activity as efficiently as possible and at rest, okay? So we can't stop it. I mean, our metabolic rate is gonna keep going like this, but we can really surely slow it down through different dietary means as well as exercise as well, okay? To maintain proper weight control and optimal body fat levels, a lifetime commitment to proper eating habits and regular physical activity is required. Now, desirable weight loss programs are defined as those that are nutritionally sound and result in maximal losses of fat weight and minimal losses of fat-free tissue. So it's very difficult to do because, well, the body will try and keep on your muscle mass as much as possible. That's why I don't like to use the term weight. You know, you hear the term weight loss all the time. I hate that term. You know, I want to weigh less? Sure, I'll go to the moon. I'll weigh less there. No problem, there's no gravity. But what I want lost is basically adipose tissue. I want fat loss. And I don't want muscle loss. I don't want to lose water, although that sort of comes part and parcel with some food that you're going to be consuming. But other than that, that's your main goal. Now, if you can lose as much fat as possible without trying to retain as much muscle weight as possible, you're much better for it. And your metabolic rate is going to love you for it, okay? But when you start losing a lot of the lean mass, which a lot of these calorie restrictive diets are all about, then you're going to really suffer the consequences of your thyroid just going from here to here, right? And it really resets the metabolic set point. Once again, It does that because it's trying to keep you alive as long as possible. If lean tissue is being lost, that signals the body that you're decaying, you're wasting away, which is not its main goal, right? So that's what happens there. Now, the undesirable weight loss programs are defined as those that are not nutritionally sound, that result in large losses of fat-free tissue, that pose potential serious medical complications, and that cannot be followed for long-term weight maintenance. That's the main key here, long-term weight maintenance. That's why I said that main word of consistency. You know, if you break it down, consistency means you're doing something for a period of time often. You know, you're not breaking it up or you're not falling off the wagon, which a lot of people tend to do because one or two mistakes are being made in either through exercise, recovery, or just the sheer diet of the individual, right? So that is, in a nutshell, what individuals have to look forward to. You know, there is no pill. There is no magic potions or miracle cures or whatever they're pushing on TV these days. It's right there, plain and simple, through one of the most respected journals looking at sports medicine. Okay, the American College of Sports Medicine, very world renowned. So therefore, a desirable weight loss program is one that provides a caloric intake not lower than 1,200 calories a day for normal adults in order to get a proper blend of foods to meet nutritional requirements. Note, now, this requirement may change for children, older individuals, and athletes. I say that simply because, you know, athletes essentially consume a lot of calories, and for good reason. There's a lot of high-intensity exercise that's being done by a lot of athletes, and you're going to see it in a couple of months, what I'm talking about when the Pan Am game comes to town. Right? And there's probably going to be on the news, they're going to have segments of, oh, what do you eat all day? Oh, how do you train? I guarantee you for sure on the local newscast, that's what you're going to see, right? And don't be surprised when you find out, because Pan Am is pretty much a stepping stone to the Olympics. That's essentially what it is. It's the baby Olympics, right? So, you know, they're upwards of 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 calories a day. That's not unheard of. But they need that, okay? As they're training twice a day. That's fine. Older individuals, of course, it's not so much about the caloric intake to help keep them healthy, but it's more to do with the nutrient density, simply because probably their digestion isn't as good as it once was 40 years ago. So they can try and consume foods that are going to be more nutrient dense, that have higher amounts of phytochemicals, antioxidants, things like that. So it's not necessarily about the calories, although you know, they need a lot less than they did when they were younger because their metabolic rate is much lower. But if it's more calorie dense and energy efficient, then that's what they're looking for as well. And children, well, that makes a lot of sense. That is the segment, unfortunately, that is growing exponentially in terms of the category of overweight and or obesity by body mass index measurements. Okay, far more in the States than it is here. A lot more dramatic numbers there, but then again, look at the population compared to us, right? What are we, 39 million people? There's 39 million people in Los Angeles. So there's gonna be a distinct difference, but it doesn't matter. You still have the same stats at a much lower percentage because of the volume of people between the countries. Still, that's the largest growing. So that is another thing. That could be a totally different talk altogether. Second, in terms of the program, includes foods that are acceptable to the dieter from the viewpoints of social, cultural background, usual habits, taste, ease in preparation. A lot of these things go into play when either you're looking at yourself or somebody else that has an issue or is talking to you about weight issues. And they try and get all these superfoods or these unique foods that you're getting in the media. No, if you're from a specific background and you've come here to Canada, eat what you normally would eat back home, because that is what your body is used to. Your taste buds are used to it. And then you start looking at other factors to try and bring things down. But I wouldn't necessarily look at specifically superfoods and just focus on that. Because, yeah, although those are good, trying to change one's diet is not necessarily going to be advantageous for the individual. So if they can stick to homegrown foods and foods that they're used to and clean, and certain cooking methods, obviously preparation is going to be into account here, because a lot of people want ease of preparation, then that can be a recipe for essentially long-term dietary compliance. Okay, so that's what they're talking about here as well. So it's pretty obvious what's happening here. Looking at clean, nutritious foods. I haven't gotten into the exercise yet, but I will. And allowing the individual to consume specific foods that they are used to in a controlled manner. And I'll get to that in a second. Includes an endurance exercise program that of at least 3 days weekly, 20 to 30 minutes in duration, at a minimum intensity of 60% of one's maximum heart rate. Provides new eating and physical activity habits that can be continued for life in order to maintain a lower body weight. So, 3 days a week, the American College, actually the American Council on Exercise, ACE, suggests roughly 150 minutes a week, okay, of exercise for individuals that are of normal weight through body mass index. Individuals that are in the overweight category, 15, 20 pounds over, they're recommending upwards of 200 minutes a week, okay? Sounds like a lot, but when you space out the 7 days, it's not all that much, right? If done correctly through a personal trainer, it can be done. Yes?
For the 150 to 200 minutes, is that at the 60% intensity level?
Yes, yes. Now, if someone is new, they have to work up to that level, right? Their conditioning is not going to be there, right? The point is, once again, that we're the consistency, that they do something, at least that can work up to 150 minutes, not necessarily at the 60% heart rate, but even if they're at 30, 40% starting out, within 8 to 12 weeks, that can easily jump another 20% if they're consistent, right? So, they're saying 60% of one's maximum heart rate because essentially that's the rate at which you can burn as much fat as possible, okay? But it really depends on the person's age, the conditioning that they're in. Are they new? Are they intermediate? Are they an advanced exerciser, right? And that's just that their diet is just falling off the wagon. There's a lot of variables there, but the point is that they are consistent and at least getting in that amount per week. Compared to not doing it, there's obviously a massive health benefit, regardless of what's going on with the person's weight, okay? That eventually comes, but the body has to get used to that, okay? So you've got this combination, you've got a specific intensity. Now, what kind of exercise is good for fat loss? Well, as I said, timing and variety are key, both aerobic and anaerobic, which means without oxygen, so weightlifting, stuff like that, are good. I'm not going to pick one. I'm not going to pick a specific exercise routine, but for example, aerobic workouts will help to burn the most fat during the workout session. What does that mean? Well, essentially, in a nutshell, the way the body gets rid of fat, stored fat, has to happen in the presence of oxygen. Without that, in terms of activity, you can't burn as much as possible. Now, your heart rate has something to do with it, because as the heart rate increases through exercise, there are certain mechanisms in the body that will allow certain fuels to be burned more often. In this case, if you're at about 60-65% of one's what's called VO2 max, which is essentially the way the body uses up oxygen or consumes oxygen through incremental exercise, you can burn as much fat as possible, okay? Now, what does that mean? Well, essentially, if you're working out on a treadmill, you can't really carry on a conversation for too long, put it that way, okay? That's what I'm talking about. And that's going to vary from individual to individual because, Not even that is an accurate measurement necessarily, but that's the best we have in terms of exercise terms. Anaerobic workouts will help to burn fat over an extended period of time after the workout. That's pretty interesting. So if you're training with weights, resistance training, bodybuilding style type weightlifting, right? What ends up happening is you're not necessarily burning, you're still burning a fair amount of calories during the workout session. But what ends up happening is because of the extreme intensity of that type of workout, afterwards, the body actually maintains a metabolic rate that's much higher than normal over an extended period of time. Some articles have suggested upwards of 6 hours after exercise. That's not common. Between 2 and 4 hours is much more common. But the point is, after exercise, you're pretty much at rest. You're not doing anything. And if you've ever started a workout program, you probably would have noticed within the first week or so that you do feel warmer throughout the day. That's your metabolic rate, plain and simple, right? It's kicked it up another notch, right? Because it's trying to use up fuels to try and repair what you've done through exercise. Exercise, what you're doing is breaking things down. That's it, right? And it sounds pretty weird, but that's exactly what's going on. And at rest, you're going to try and neutralize that by using up certain fuels, and your metabolic rate is going to increase, and so on and so forth, right? So you have this reaction all the time. Right? That's why they're always stressing exercise, but certain foods at certain times are also going to help to do that as well, and I'm going to get to that in a second. Okay? So you've got aerobic workouts and anaerobic workouts. So you've got the benefits of both. One, maximizing the caloric oxidation during the workout, and one afterwards. Okay? So you have the best of both worlds. So if one can, they can work out aerobically or anaerobically, depending on how much time they actually have. Yes?
Should you start with an anaerobic workout then and finish with an aerobic workout?
That-
Find how to burn the maximum number of calories if you're still working afterwards?
That's a good question, and I get that question all the time. Yes, ideally. The reason why is because the body goes through a specific phase, right? It burns up certain stored nutrients at different times. If you're doing something that's aerobic, first off, and it's pretty intense, because I have to get the intensity in there. So if your workload is going to get your heart rate up, and you can't carry on a conversation, all of a sudden, you finish that, and okay, I'm going to hit the weights. What have you pretty much done? You've gotten rid of vital sugars that are in muscle. And generally, okay, people are going to say, well, you're just basically working legs because it's aerobic and you're walking or running or you're on a stepper or whatever. It doesn't matter. A lot of people move their arms, shoulders, back is engaged as well. So you're getting rid of a lot of sugars at the onset. And with anaerobic work or with weight training, you're going to need that sugar. So if you've gotten rid of that, first off and foremost, you're not going to get the best out of the second portion of exercise. But what you can do is if you reverse it and you're getting rid of those sugars first, and you're doing a combination of multi-joint exercises that you're working 2 or 3 different muscle groups, you're getting rid of a lot of glycogen. That's the stored sugar we talked about earlier. Thus, what do you have left? You have what's stored in the liver primarily, if you've worked out a specific time frame beforehand in terms of weights, and you've got fat stores. So remember, in the presence of oxygen, that's when fat really gets demolished. You have a lot less to work with. So when you're actually doing weights first and aerobic activity second, chances are that you're going to tap into the fat stores a lot sooner, okay, with a much more minimal time. But you can do the best of both worlds, and that's what a lot of people are doing nowadays, is that they're not resting for long periods of time in terms of exercise. They've got what's called interval training, where you've got a blend of high-intensity workloads, medium and low-intensity workloads in a given time frame, where their total amount of time spent training is going to be a lot shorter, but yet, in that time frame, they've maximized the amount of not only fat, but calories that have been burned. So, the 1980s are all about aerobics, and basically steady-state cardio. And then in came the 90s with a lot of high-volume type training with weights. And now it's come back to, okay, people don't have a lot of time, so what can we do in the meantime to really maximize? And that's, come to the point where you've probably heard of CrossFit, and this is the era that we're in now, where there's very minimal rest periods with maximal output in terms of workload, where your body is really going through an intense mode of working out for a very short period of time, which is great. But if people don't understand it that well, and the trainer doesn't understand what's going on, and they're just doing it then there's going to be injuries, and there's going to be individuals that are going to need a lot more recovery than they thought they did. And that's the issue right now, which is, there's nothing wrong with it. It just has to be done correctly, right? So that's why I say any type of exercise is going to work. It's just make sure that you get enough rest period, and that basically that you know what you're actually doing when you are exercising. So if you're new, I would highly recommend a trainer for at least 10 sessions so you know what you're doing, and then you're on your own. You should know what's going on, right? And then you can go at your own pace, and you're doing whatever you're doing properly, right? But that's, a little bit more higher end, but when it comes down to it, you're preventing injury. And that's a lot of problems, especially, I make it a joke. It's like, good luck trying to join a gym or trying to go to the gym, after the first week after January, because there's nothing that you can't move, but go there in May and you've got a field day with whatever equipment you want, because it's a resolution, not a lifestyle change. It's different, right? Mentally, it's different, right? So, yes.
What are your thoughts on exercising first thing in the morning?
Yeah, that's another common question. Some people can do it with ease, without consuming anything, and then they're just going. If they're going to do that, and you're going to be exercising in the morning, what I recommend is pay attention to what you had the night before, right? If you didn't have a lot for dinner, or if you had mainly just proteins with, leafy greens, and, the energy intake that day was not great that day before, you're going to have a real tough time maximizing exercise, okay? You're going to feel tired. You're not going to feel like you want to exercise. You're just going through the motions, but you can't wait to go home. On the other hand, if you consume foods appropriately, increase the carbohydrate content a little bit more, starchy carbohydrates, which is going to give you that stored energy, you don't necessarily have to have anything in the morning, but make sure that you are hydrated. That's the main thing. Is it going to make a difference? Yeah. I mean, you're going to tap into your fat stores a lot sooner, but any time that you're exercising is a good time. It doesn't really matter if it's morning, afternoon, or night, right? The point is that you're actually exercising, okay? So some people can't do it in the morning and they'll give up. Doesn't matter, who cares? If you've got time at night, do it at night, big deal, right? The point is that you are getting rid of calories that, otherwise shouldn't be stored if you wanted to maintain a specific body composition, okay? So it's doable, but there are several parameters there, okay? So talking about nutrition, don't ignore carbohydrates altogether. Food and nutrient consumption before, during, and after exercise is also very important. And meal timing for optimum weight management and optimum performance. Carbohydrates, protein, and fat intake strategies. So we have all this. Now, when I say don't ignore carbohydrates altogether, that's the one thing that comes to mind when it comes to fat management or weight management, is that carbohydrates are the enemy, it's evil, and we shouldn't be consuming these particular foods, which is completely false. Carbohydrates, when timed correctly, and in this case, for example, even if somebody's not exercising and they're really paying attention to the diet, or they went to go see a nutritionist and they've got the diet portioned down, for whatever reason they can't exercise, they have an injury, or the doctor's told them not to exercise because it's going to be, there's going to be a disadvantage for a period of time. They can still have carbohydrates, but here's how the body works. Provided you get enough rest and enough sleep. We'll start off with sleep. From the time you go to sleep to the time you wake up, hopefully that 6 to 7 hour period that you're uninterrupted sleep, there are certain hormones that are going to be active at night. Primarily growth hormone is very active. Okay. And that's a hormone that basically protects lean tissue, but at the same time maximizes fat loss when you are stimulated or when you wake up, okay? And that happens on an empty stomach. So hopefully individuals are not consuming something before they're going to bed, right? Several hours before going to bed, you've had dinner, that's fine. But other than that, just watch it. That's one. When you wake up in the morning, remember the body's trying to keep you alive as long as possible. What do you think is going to be active? There's certain hormones that are active, including growth hormone, which is also insulin. The sensitivity, your cells are very sensitive to this hormone. And that is great because that can maximize the carbohydrate intake. And I recommend individuals consume, if they wanted to, this is the easy way to do it, consume the most amount of carbohydrates in the morning, or at least for their body weight, in the morning, and slowly start to diminish them as the day goes on. That's one. Second, if you're talking about fat, which is the other energy nutrient, the minimum amount of fat in the morning and start to maximize it as the day goes on. So you've got these two waves here, where you've got the maximum amount of carbs in the morning, minimum amount of fat, and the carbs are going like this, and the fat is going like that, right? What's happening there is you're allowing the body to consume foods in a timely fashion, and hopefully that you are consuming in 2.5, 3 hours apart. What you're doing is you're always giving the body a specific amount of energy with the minimum amount of possible storage because insulin is very high. What you're doing is you're controlling insulin this way, right? You got the maximum amount of sensitivity in the morning, and as the day goes on, your sensitivity, your cells are starting to be a little bit more deaf to that insulin as the day goes on. That's why I say minimize the amount of carbs throughout the day as the day goes on. Fat, on the other hand, if you minimize those carbs, fat necessarily isn't going to be stored. It still needs to be used because carbohydrates are not going to be there at the same time. And what about protein? Protein, consistent throughout the whole day, right? You don't want too much or too little, but you want to be consistent. Why? Well, your tissues, your cells, everything's made up of protein. Your hair, your skin, right? So if you can keep that consistency throughout the whole day, it's also maximizing metabolic rate. Protein in line means of primary importance. So there's a reason why it's named that. It's because if we don't get enough, we're going to lose that lean tissue eventually. Not right away, but eventually your body's going to start to chew on its own tissue in extreme terms. But that's why protein is necessary, okay? The effects of resistance exercise, talking about maintaining lean mass, increases muscle mass if you want it to. Enhanced nitrogen balance, retention of protein. So it retains that protein. So people that don't exercise that are on these high protein diets are not necessarily keeping their muscle tissue, okay? Because there's no activity there to stimulate muscle maintenance. Increases insulin sensitivity, decreases the risk of diabetes. So your cells are always starving, right? They're always going to be sensitive to insulin if you're exercising in a timely manner, okay? Raises metabolic rate over the course of the day. This varies with the intensity of the workout. Now, I've seen some funny things at the gym, but you got some people that are on their phones and their rest periods are like 5 minutes, and okay, and then they start, the intensity is going to be very low. Don't expect to wolf down a massive meal afterwards because you're so exhausted. So the intensity level really is going to dictate what your metabolic rate is going to be looking like afterwards. If it's high intensity, you couldn't carry on a conversation, you're sweating profusely, trust me, your body's metabolic rate is going to be up here. It's trying to keep you alive as long as possible, so it's shuttling all kinds of nutrients to the different cells. You're breaking your body down. You're just trying to maintain a balance there, right? So that's what happens with the effects of resistance exercise. You're maintaining muscle mass, or you can build muscle mass. It's really up to the individual. And if you can build more muscle, guess what? Your metabolic rate is increased even more because it's trying to keep that lean tissue active, right? Muscle is active tissue. Fat, majority, not so active. It's dead tissue. Never made anybody run any faster or never made anybody stronger, okay? So, we need it, but not so much that, that we're looking crazy. Components of daily energy expenditure from least to most. Now this is what your body's metabolic rate goes through here. From least, the thermic effect of food. Yes, believe it or not. 10% of thermogenesis or digestion of food. The effect varies substantially from different food components. So just the sheer act of eating and consuming foods in a timely fashion, not waiting too long or 5 hours between meals where your blood sugar goes like this and then goes like this and then goes like this and then goes like this. You try and keep it level, stable. And why did I say protein throughout the whole day? Because when it comes to the thermic effect of food, it's got the highest effect in terms of caloric expenditure. Yes, your body breaks down proteins far slower and it requires a lot more energy to do so. And so you're actually increasing the amount of calories or caloric burn that you're doing through protein consumption. So for example, dietary fat is easy to process and has very little thermic effect, while protein is hard to process and has a much larger thermic effect. Now, not all proteins are hard to break down. Animal proteins is what I'm talking about here. Chicken, fish, red meat, okay? Those ones there are much harder to break down. And I'm not telling anybody to follow a specific diet because everybody is different. But you can understand, here's the extreme example. If you're at a barbecue, it's not because you're sweating because it's a hot day outside after you finished eating. Your body's working to break that steak down, right? You get they call it the meat sweats. What do you think the meat sweats is? It's basically your body's energy trying to break down that protein, right? In essence, that's a thermic effect, which increases metabolic rate. Your basal metabolic rate, about 70% of a human's total energy expenditure is due to the basal life processes within the organs of the body. Your brain is functioning, organs are functioning, your heart's pumping, your liver's doing stuff, your kidneys are doing stuff. We don't tell it to do anything. Thank God it does it on its own. But all that consumes a lot of energy, especially brain activity, And for anybody that's just finished school or did exams, and they're studying for exams, and they just finished eating an hour ago, after they finished studying for 2 hours, they're starved. They're ravaged. Why? The brain is just fried. Basically, it's chewing up a lot of energy, right? And that's just mental energy, right? So that's what I'm talking about is the basal metabolic rate there, okay? That's just an example. Sleeping metabolic rate, yes. You burn an average of between 60 and 80 calories an hour just from sleeping. Right? Interrupt your sleep, that goes down. But you get into REM sleep or deep sleep, you're burning calories just by breathing, okay? And that's a good thing, okay? It actually keeps you warmer. If you're in a deeper sleep, you're actually a little bit warmer than if you were just with eyes open, okay? And that's a thermic effect of sleep. Physical activity, about 20% of one's energy expenditure comes from physical activity. So all this ramping up about exercise, that's what you got to do. And then you go to the doctor's office, so you got to start exercising. That's why you're overweight, blah, blah, blah. No. That's a part, it's a small piece of the puzzle. It helps, but it's not the main thing. It's part of everything else. If you forget about everything else, 20%, what happened to the other 80%? What's going on there, right? So it does help, most definitely, especially if you become more advanced at working out. It helps much more, but it's not the main thing. What ends up happening is that what you put in your mouth and how you process it is the main thing, okay? So you've got the resting metabolic rate, which is comprised of body composition. Fat-free mass is the most important determinant there. And energy balance. Hypocaloric diets reduce metabolic rate. So we get to the tricky question here, right? You have too little calories. You start losing muscle, water, everything else. Fat, yeah. But what ends up happening is your body starts to slow things down. And when you start increasing it again, it's thinking, okay, I don't know when the heck this is going to happen again. So you know what? I'm going to keep the metabolic rate right here. I'm not going to leave it up here. Leave it right here so I can store a little bit more, just in case this person starts to dip again, right? So there always has to be an equilibrium there, an energy balance that has to be met in that case, okay? Fat-free mass, that body composition factor, try not to lose muscle. That's all I gotta say. Like I said, age, it sucks. Yeah, we're gonna get older, we're gonna lose lean mass, but one way to make sure that you can slow that down to almost a bare minimum is through exercise, and especially through resistance exercise. The best prescription for maintaining bone density is resistance exercise, not Fosamax, not anything else, right? Resistance exercise, that's the only thing. Just think about it. If your muscles are not being worked, what's muscle attached to? It's attached to bone. Tendons are there as well, right? So if muscles aren't being worked, what do you think your bones are going to look like after 40, 50, 60 years? You're going to get a softening of bone, right? Brittle. But if you get into the habit of exercising and with weights, there's a reason, thank goodness we have gravity on Earth, then you've got much more bone density. And I show this one slide to my class of a DEXA scan. Now, anybody that knows what a DEXA scan is probably got their bone density, mineral density test done, okay, their BMD done, right? But it also scores fat mass and lean mass and stuff like that. And it was a picture of a bodybuilder. It's pretty much an X-ray machine, and it shows you images, right, of all these different tissues. If you ever get it done, it's pretty cool. Anyways, so you've got a bodybuilder, you've got somebody that's just regular, with the same body mass index. They're exactly the same. But one clear thing that you see through these pictures is that the shading of bone in the bodybuilder is much darker than the person that's just average size. That leads me to believe that there's more dense muscle, or more dense bone overall skeletal frame of that individual. Okay, bodybuilder is extreme, but I'm using that example to give you an idea. Bodybuilders have large muscles, hence it's no surprise that they're going to have far denser bone structure. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about regarding not only the fat-free mass, but ensuring that your body is not falling apart. Okay. The thermic effect of feeding. Fat is far less thermogenic than carbohydrates. Protein is more thermogenic than carbohydrates. You need all three of these nutrients, for sure, okay? But just remember that protein should never be neglected. We should have it almost at every meal if you want to have a consistency there of metabolic rate, no matter what age. And don't worry about your kidneys exploding and this and that if you get a little bit too much protein. That's nonsense. It's never been proven in any journal that consuming higher than the RDIs of protein, if you're exercising, has had any detrimental effects on kidneys or liver function, unless the person is missing a kidney or has a problem with the liver. That's a totally different story. If you've got healthy functioning organs, a little bit more protein goes a long way in terms of maintaining muscle mass, especially if you're in a slightly hypocaloric or less caloric diet. Okay, that's why protein is very essential. Physical activity, voluntary, this is also affecting metabolic rate. Walking, running, weight training that we talked about. Involuntary, fidgeting, the nervous person. You've seen it. You've got individuals that are always shaking like a leaf, and they're a specific type that talk a lot, talk fast, and don't like wind when they go outside because then they get all cold. Those types of people, and they're eating like this, and they stay just lean all the way through. That's involuntary, right? They're shivering, and there's just a breeze that went by. Meanwhile, it's 30 degrees outside, right? So that type of movement as well is also increasing the metabolic rate, believe it or not. Right? It's a new thing, actually, that they found out. It wasn't just the exercise, but involuntary moving, like fidgeting or just fiddling around, is actually increasing your metabolic rate overall. So you've got that as well. Right? So there's all these different factors that come into play. Now, if you're looking at diets, so I kept talking about diet, right? Comparison of Atkins, the Atkins diet, we all know that, right? Low carbohydrate, high fat, high protein. Zone diet, pretty even, pretty equal split. The Dean Ornish diet and the Learn diets for a change in weight and related risk factors among overweight premenopausal women. There's actually an actual study done. 12-month randomized trial, BMI 27 to 40, which is overweight and obese category, okay? Atkins, number of participants 77, under 20 grams of carbohydrates for 2 to 3 months, under 50 grams of carbohydrates, no caloric restriction, okay? Zone diet, 79 participants, 40% carbs, 30% protein, 30% fat, and minor caloric restriction, which is pretty balanced, not too bad. The Learn diet, lifestyle, exercise, attitude, relationships, and nutrition. This is a lot more to do with behavioral modification, but anyways, 79 participants, 50 to 60 grams of carbohydrates, under 10% saturated fat, caloric restriction, exercise, behavior modification. So you have heavier on the carbohydrate side there. And the Dean Ornish diet, 76 number of participants, under 10% of fat, no caloric restrictions. Okay, so his is pretty heavy on the carbohydrate base, although much cleaner carbs, but regardless, much heavier on the carbohydrate based. He has more to do with heart disease and overall cardiovascular health in terms of this Ornish diet. Okay, it's a sort of a dated type of a diet, but regardless, it's very popular. So you have these 4 main diets that were looked at, and all they were looking at were weight and risk factors among overweight premenopausal women. So did they lose a specific amount of weight, and how long did it take to do so? Looking at all of these particular styles and all of these diets, okay? This is what I talk about when I say I don't like to use the word diet, because eventually all diets come to an end, eventually, right? So what they looked at here was the changes in body fat percentages, a comparison of the 4 diets. So we've got 2 months, we've got 6 months there in the middle, and 12 months at the end. So the period of 1 year. Within the 2 months, as you can clearly see, the Atkins diet has been the most dramatic in all of the 4 diets, looking at a minus of 4.5 body fat drop. The Zone diet is pretty consistent. The Learn diet, not too bad, although the 6 month is pretty dramatic there. And the Ornish diet, pretty consistent, but never reached the peak of the Atkins. Now, even the Atkins started to draw back after 12 months. The main thing is here, the whole point of this is to show that after about a period of a year, pretty much levels are almost going to start to go back to baseline again. What does that mean? The body gets used to it. And you'd have to have more dramatic circumstances like caloric restriction or lower amount of carbohydrate ingestion over a longer period of time to try and maximize the amount of fat loss, but eventually it all comes back to level, right? And obviously exercise has been part of all 3 of them. But the point is that you're increasing a specific nutrient, you're decreasing a specific nutrient for a period of time. Trust me, the body's going to know that. It's going to notice it, and your metabolic rate is going to start to fluctuate after a while. The reason why Atkins actually has the highest amount is that, yes, in terms of insulin, the body's not impacted with that much insulin when you're on the Atkins diet. It's high protein, high fat, very low carbohydrate, right? But even then, this still needs fuel. And yeah, your brain can run on fats for a period of time, but its preferred fuel are sugars. It's glycogen, right? It has to run on that. You know, your cells were made to run on that, yes, as well as fats, but it's a very, very limited process, okay? So in the end, after about a year, everything comes back to baseline. So I don't like the word diet, all right? What we need to look at is more to do with everything else and not just looking at the caloric. I hate calories. With my clients, I don't give them any caloric counts. You know, I know off the top of my head, roughly give or take, if they're giving me a plan, oh yeah, you're not getting enough calories. What do you mean? I'm eating this. No. The amounts are not there, blah, blah. Fine. But I don't know anybody that's counting calories, nor should anybody count calories. It's there for a guide. It's good. And for athletes, more so, because there's other situations happening. Exercise is a stressor, by the way. So, they would have to keep up with the amount of energy in, energy out. But other than that, caloric counting is not the way to go. And a lot of people are confused when they start doing that, because then you start being preoccupied. They're not created equal, as the saying goes. So essentially, you'd want a balanced approach, okay? Hypocaloric equals balanced caloric deficit diet. To be on a hypocaloric diet, it will take at least 2 days to reduce the basal metabolic rate. So if you've gone really low, let's say you started something and you just don't eat as much as you normally would have, and 48 hours later, your body recognizes that and actually drops your metabolic rate. That's how fast it takes, 48 hours, okay? Under 20% fat, balanced carbohydrates and proteins, okay? Exercise, this is what we should be doing here. Aerobic, accumulation of 40 minutes a day, upwards of 4 days a week, intermittent or steady. So you've got high and low intensities or steady state cardiovascular work. You know, that's a lot easier on the joints. If, you know, for older individuals, steady state cardiovascular work is much easier, okay? So not one is necessarily better than the other. Progressive resistance training, high intensity upper and lower body at least 2 times a week. So you've got the maintenance of muscle mass there and the maintenance of bone. No one diet program fits everyone. From the National Weight Control Registry. People who have lost more than 30 pounds in over 1 year, the success is associated with breakfast, exercise, 24% of calories are coming from mixed fat and recorded food and weight records. Okay, I don't know anybody that's gonna write everything down. But if you can at least remember what you had that day, right? You know, just be aware of what you're eating. Because a lot of people just, they're stimulated. They're eating, they're on the phone. They're eating, they're watching TV. They're eating, they're on the computer. Take that out of the... Enjoy your food, know what you're eating, remember what you're eating that day, right? You don't have to count calories, just remember what you ate that day, right? If you know you had a lot of starchy foods, and we all know what starchy foods are, one day, you remember that. And the next day, what are you gonna do? You're gonna do the same thing? No, I'm gonna have more protein-containing foods, I have more fiber, right? As long as you balance it that way, your body's gonna be balanced, right? So we're pretty good with the foods. I mean, we all shop at grocery stores, we should be familiar with what foods have what, right? In a nutshell, we should, right? So no one program fits all. No one dieting program emerged as the best. So, you know, this is a different overall meta-analysis that I'm talking about here. It wasn't the same one I showed you a couple of slides ago. But even then, no one diet is going to emerge to be the best. You know, low calorie, low carb, high fat, high protein. Forget it. It's got to be balanced. That's the whole point, right? There's 1,000,001 books out there. You go to chapters, you go into that lifestyle section. It's mind-boggling. People that don't even have degrees are putting out these books. I don't understand what's going on. So it's no wonder you got so much confusion, right? So what do? You put it all together, right? Here's the plan. Eat frequently throughout the day. Main reason, stabilizes blood sugar, okay? Maintains energy throughout the day. You're not going too far off from meal to meal, so you're not gonna have that 3 o'clock crash where you need a coffee and a bagel. And the metabolic rate is gonna remain elevated. And I use this crude terminology or this crude example, but just think of a fireplace, right? Okay, so you light a piece of wood on fire, you throw it in the pit there, and it's burning. Yeah. You keep feeding wood every so often. That flame is going to keep burning. That heat is going to be there. The minute you start forgetting about putting in more wood, it's going to start to go lower and lower and lower, and you got embers. You can think of that flame as your metabolic rate, and you can think of that wood as being foods, or clean foods even, right? So if you do it often, you keep the flame up here, and the metabolic rate is consistently up here, right? Because your body just knows. And after a while, if you're not used to doing this, after about 2 or 3 weeks, and you continue to do this, you're not even looking at, oh, what time I had the last meal, but you're gonna feel hungry without even thinking about it, right? So eventually, look, I mean, case in point again, from fireplaces to babies. You look at a baby, you gotta consistently feed that thing, right? Oh, that's terrible. You gotta consistently feed that baby, right? You hold a baby in your arms, they're pretty warm, right? Like they're pretty warm. Envious because they got a lot of brown fats, and brown fats, oh man, they got a lot of energy, right? And as adults, we lose a lot of those brown fats. We still have them, but those brown fats are much smaller. So you have to continuously feed that baby. Why? Because the metabolic rate is like this, shooting up. It's like crazy, because they gotta grow, right? If you don't feed it, well, what's gonna happen? it's going to be trouble, right? Babies are very resilient. They can withstand a lot of things in terms of environment and just overall, even emotions from the parents and stuff. So basically, you should be doing the same thing as adults. Continue feeding the body periodically, consistently, and that metabolic rate is still going to be there. It's gonna be up there, right? So that's what it is there. Don't neglect any one macronutrient in the diet. As I said earlier before, between the amount of carbohydrates in the morning and lowering it towards the day, as the end of the day, and then fat, the opposite, you can't really neglect any macronutrient. Your body needs all three. Your body's going to recognize if it's too low in one or the other. You're going to start getting cravings. All right? That's the other issue. A lot of individuals that are trying different methods really start to get cravings, and that destroys anything that they've tried to do earlier. Okay? But if you give the body what it needs in terms of all the three nutrients, you're not going to get those cravings. You're not going to feel like binge eating. You're not going to feel like having chips at 11 o'clock at night, stuff like that, okay? Because the blood sugar levels are stable. It hasn't gone down, or they haven't gone way up, which causes another reaction. So you have that as well. The timing of nutrients to control weight and maximize exercise performance. Once again, exercise, that's great, but make sure that you're eating. A lot of people after exercise, I'll just have a protein shake, or I'll have something small. No, if you've actually exercised, don't worry. Consume the carbohydrates, consume the proteins. Take it easy on the fat. That's my advice, right? You shouldn't be having any types of fat unless it's fish oil at the end of a workout. But the two main nutrients that are needed if you've worked out intensely are carbohydrates and proteins, right? Ideally, if you can, a 2-to-1 ratio, protein to carbs or carb to protein. It really depends upon what you've done, right? That's all you would need, okay? So 60 grams of protein to 30 grams of carbohydrates, vice versa. Right? If you've done more cardio, you may need a little bit more carbohydrates. If you've done more weights, you may need a little bit more protein. But other than that, a 2-to-1 is very easy to remember, right? One website that I found very, very helpful over the years, it's called nutritiondata.com. You can find any food on that website there, and it's like an encyclopedia. It's got everything. What the glycemic load is, what the protein, fat, carbohydrate is of a different food, of a serving of a food, the nutrients that are in there, the impact on blood sugar. It's incredible, right? And they'll give you also, comparisons. It's called nutritiondata.com, right? It's not funded by any one particular, no, it's almost like a Wikipedia of food almost, right? It's got everything. Yeah. More American-based than Canadian. It's American. So you've got certain things that you're not going to find here, but regardless, when you've got over 10,000 foods, what more do you need, right? So anyways, that's what's helped me with the ratios, and you can get that info on that as well, okay?
It's not coming from anybody, like you mentioned, degrees. How actually, the data is there, how accurate the data is?
The data is very accurate. It is very accurate because essentially it gets updated constantly. And I've looked at that situation. I was like, okay, hold on a second. This got how many calories? Wait a minute. I've had, dietitians use these books, not anymore. They used to. I have a book like this. It's got all caloric counts and all that. And I've checked on that as well. And it's very, very close. Okay, it's going to differ slightly because of the serving sizes. But other than that, if you calculate it out, a lot of the foods, the ones that I've looked at, primarily for protein, carbs, and fats, the main ones that people eat, pretty accurate. It's pretty accurate. Like I said, there are certain brand name packaged foods that are there that you can't get here. Okay, that's going to be totally different. We don't know. But, just regular produce, dairy, meats, all the food groups are there. Not the packaged ones. Just look at all that and stick to that. Forget about the package because there's a lot of companies we can't get on that website. But it's very accurate. Yeah, I've never found an issue with it at all. Yes.
In terms of the balancing blood sugar and eating frequently throughout the day, this morning they recommended to have 3 larger meals and not have as many
Yeah, but what was the context of that? Why was it 3 large meals a day? Were they talking about something specific, or? I mean, yes. Now, you can have 3 meals a day, having the same amount of calories instead of grazing throughout the day and still having the same amount of calories. When it comes to, if you're incorporating exercise, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Because now you have a stressor at a specific period of time that if you are eating breakfast, you have exercise, and you're waiting another 2 hours or 3 hours to eat, because it's your second meal and then your third meal, you're going to create a reaction where maybe the stress levels are going to be a little bit higher. And if you do that over time, it's not going to happen immediately, but if you do that over time and you've got exercise as part of that, now you've got stress hormones that are going to start storing fuels instead of burning them. Okay, you all heard of cortisol. It's not the end all be all, but that's a major one that I'm talking about there. If you're a sedentary individual, you don't exercise, you're having 3 square meals a day, and you're within your limits, yeah, the same thing is going to happen. Your body composition is not going to change, or it may drop body fat. But if there's an exercise component, that doesn't fit too well. You have to get into that mode of ensuring that your body still has to recover from that. As long as you've exercised, that the intensity is there. You're not, like I said, not going through the motions, not causing a metabolic, what's called a metabolic shift, right? So if you've exercised intensely, you're going to have to change the eating pattern.
And is there like a recommended sort of like maybe 3 hours before exercise, these types of foods, an hour before exercise, these types? Sure, like,
yeah, so I mean, yeah. So before exercise, ideally, you'd want something that is going to sustain your energy. So anything that's a complex carbohydrate, this is the easiest way I can think of it. Anything that's going to sustain your blood sugar over a long period of time, basically is going to be a complex carbohydrate with a little bit of protein, right? So complex carbohydrates, what are they? They're longer chain sugars with possibly fiber connected to them as well, right? So any food that's going to have that classification, you could have before the workout, okay? Or I'd say not right before, about an hour and a half to 2 hours before. You don't want anything in here as you're exercising. That's going to be a problem, right? During the exercise, it really depends. Is it under an hour? And if it is under an hour, you don't necessarily need to fuel up with any carbohydrates. You see these kids with these Gatorades and Powerades and all this stuff. The parents are shoveling it in their mouth. No, they don't need it, right? Same thing with adults. If it's under an hour, all you have to do is ensure that you're hydrated. That's it. The easiest way to know that you're hydrated, here's a little tip here, in case you didn't know, very easy to do. If you're in an exercise routine and you want to make sure you're hydrated, weigh yourself before exercise and weigh yourself after exercise. If you're the same weight before and after, you're hydrated. The time you're dehydrated is when you start weighing less after exercise. So for each pound that you lose after exercise, you have to replace about a half a liter or 500 milliliters of fluid, okay? So that gives you a nice little heads up, because a lot of people don't know that, and hunger sometimes masks dehydration. You're really thirsty, you're not hungry, right? So there's another trick there that a lot of people tend to overeat afterwards and like, oh, what the hell, I'm exercising this long and I haven't lost anything. Yeah, because you're probably messing up afterwards, right? So that's a nice little trick that I always use, and it's pretty accurate in terms of staying hydrated. If it's over an hour and a half, you're exercising for 2 hours, 3 hours, if you're a marathoner, yeah, have some type of carbohydrate, quick digestible carbohydrate. The easiest thing I can think of is, you have a mixture. And I usually use this during my class for fitness and sports, but what the hell, let you have a take on this. Very simple. Actually, not 1. 2 tablespoons of maple syrup or honey. All right, 500 milliliters of water and 1/4 teaspoon sea salt. What is that giving you? That's giving you about 30 grams of carbohydrates. Why do I use maple syrup or honey? Because they're a longer chain carbohydrate. It's not something that's going to just boost your blood sugar and then drop it. It's steadily going to increase it for extended energy. So the chains in maple syrup and or honey are long and medium chain type carbohydrates. It's going to keep your blood sugars up there without giving you a crash. Why do I use 500 milliliters to that? It's what's called a percentage, carbohydrate percentage. That's been studied for many, many years, and a lot of different companies use it. Gatorade, Powerade, and stuff. You'll notice when you look at the bottle, it's a 6 to 8% carbohydrate solution, it's called, and that's ideal for emptying the stomach and getting into the bloodstream rather quickly, okay? And why a quarter teaspoon of sea salt? Well, sea salt's got some electrolytes in there that you may lose during exercise. I like Himalayan salts, personally, because it's got a lot more trace minerals. Yeah, so you can cover a wide range of electrolytes that may be lost. But something like that, if you're exercising for over an hour and a half, 2-3 hours, right, is ideal. You don't just want water.
Sorry, did you say you're doing that before you exercise?
Before or during, even, right? You mix it, yeah, it's all together mixed, right? Instead of just consuming something that's got artificial flavoring, artificial colors, no, you don't need that, right? This is good enough. So the supplements that I mentioned, fish oils, flax oils, protein powder, multivitamin, multi-greens powder. Do you need it? Maybe not, maybe you do. The point is, this blend here provides anti-inflammatory omega-3s through the fish and or flax oils for individuals that are exercising. It also helps to increase the rate of fat burning, these types of oils. Protein powders, do you need it? Not if you're getting enough protein, but ideally after a workout, it's been shown that liquid nutrition opposed to solid nutrition allows for better recuperation. And what do you mix protein powder with? Water, liquid nutrition. So you can use that as part of the nutritional plan. A multivitamin, basically an insurance that you're getting the vitamins and minerals that you need. We can eat the cleanest that we can possibly eat. Unfortunately, foods come from all over the world, picked not when they're ready to be picked, but way before. So nutritionally, we may not be getting what we think we're getting. But still, food is first, but this is an insurance that you're getting it. And a multi-greens powder. I like the multi-greens powder because it helps with the electrolytes. It also keeps the blood alkaline, keeps your body alkaline. Less acidic you are, the less chance that you're storing toxins. And you've got a chlorophyll component there that actually helps with energy as well as oxygenation of the blood if one is exercising. It's not set in stone, but a greens powder, which one?
There's a lot out there.
There is a lot out there. Greens Plus is okay. They're pretty good. North Coast Naturals is a product that they have a greens, which is quite good. I can't remember what it's called. New Chapter, I don't know if they still have this greens, but this is the only one that I ever found that's completely 100% organic. I think it was called Berry Greens from New Chapter. That's a good one too. Or if you want just single algae, spirulina on its own, it's fine. Chlorella on its own, that's fine. You don't have to have necessarily a mixed blend, right? But that last point there, not necessary, but something to think about that actually accentuates everything that I just talked about in terms of nutrition and not only helping out with recovery from exercise, but even in weight management issues.